Every morning at 5:30, the old wooden floors of St. Catherine's Convent would creak under the soft footsteps of Sister Agnes. She moved quietly through the dim hallways, her long brown habit rustling gently as she made her way to the chapel for morning prayers. At 72 years old, she had been doing this same routine for nearly 5 decades. The other sisters knew her as the quiet one, the one who never complained about the cold winter mornings or the simple meals they shared. She swept the floors without being asked, tended to the small vegetable garden behind the convent, and always had a gentle smile for visitors who came seeking comfort or guidance. To everyone around her, Sister Agnes was exactly what people expected a nun to be: peaceful, humble, and devoted to God. But what they didn't know was that every time Sister Agnes walked past the old piano in the convent's main hall, her fingers would twitch slightly. Just a small movement that no one ever noticed. Her eyes would linger on the dusty keys for just a moment longer than necessary, before she would continue on her way, her hands clasped together in front of her. The piano had been there for as long as anyone could remember. It was a beautiful instrument once, a grand piano with rich mahogany wood that had been donated by a wealthy family decades ago. Now it sat mostly forgotten, used only during evening prayers when Sister Mary would play simple hymns. The keys were yellowed with age, and some of them stuck when pressed too hard. Sister Agnes had arrived at the convent when she was just 22 years old. That was back in 1975, when the world outside was full of change and excitement. Young people were fighting for causes they believed in. Music was evolving in new directions, and women were demanding equal rights in ways that had never been seen before. She hadn't always been Sister Agnes. Before taking her vows, she had been Annie Rodriguez, a young woman from a small town in Pennsylvania. Her parents had worked hard to give her opportunities they never had. Her father fixed cars at the local garage, working long hours with grease under his fingernails. Her mother cleaned houses for the wealthy families on the hill, always making sure Annie had clean clothes and enough to eat. When Annie was 5 years old, her grandmother noticed something special about the little girl. While other children played with dolls or ran around the yard, Annie would sit at her grandmother's old upright piano and press the keys, listening carefully to each sound. She didn't just bang on the keys like most children did. She seemed to understand that each key made a different note, and she would try to make them sound good together. Her grandmother had played piano when she was younger, before life got busy with raising children and keeping house. She saw something in Annie that reminded her of herself at that age, a hunger for music that couldn't be ignored. So she started teaching the little girl everything she remembered. Annie learned fast, really fast. Within a year, she was playing simple songs that her grandmother taught her. By the time she was 8, she was playing pieces that were meant for much older students. Her small fingers moved across the keys with a confidence that surprised everyone who heard her play. When Annie turned 10, her parents made a decision that would change everything. They scraped together money they didn't really have and enrolled her in proper piano lessons with Mrs. Henderson, the best piano teacher in their area. Mrs. Henderson had studied at a famous music school in New York City before moving to their small town, and she knew real talent when she heard it. The lessons weren't cheap. Annie's father started working extra shifts at the garage, and her mother took on more houses to clean. They never complained, never made Annie feel guilty about the sacrifice they were making. They believed in her gift and wanted to give her every chance to develop it. Mrs. Henderson pushed Annie harder than her grandmother had. She made her practice scales for hours, work on pieces that seemed impossible at first, and understand the deeper meaning behind the music she played. Annie didn't mind the hard work. In fact, she loved it. When she sat at the piano, everything else in the world seemed to fade away. There were no worries about money, no concerns about fitting in at school, no anxiety about the future. There was just the music and her fingers dancing across the keys. By the time Annie was in high school, she was winning competitions. Not just local ones, but regional contests that brought together the best young pianists from several states. She would travel with Mrs. Henderson to these competitions, staying in modest hotels and eating simple meals. But Annie didn't care about any of that. She cared about the music and the chance to share her gift with others. The other students at her high school thought she was a bit strange. While they were going to parties and dating, Annie spent most of her free time practicing piano. She had friends, but music was always her first priority. Some people understood, but many didn't. They couldn't comprehend why someone would choose to spend so many hours alone with an instrument instead of hanging out and having what they considered normal teenage fun. When Annie was 17, something happened that would change the direction of her entire life. Mrs. Henderson arranged for her to audition at several prestigious music schools. The plan was for Annie to study piano performance at a university level, maybe even become a professional concert pianist someday. She had the talent for it. Everyone said so. But during her senior year of high school, Annie started feeling pulled in a different direction. She began spending more time at her family's small Catholic church, not just for Sunday Mass, but for daily prayers and quiet reflection. She found herself thinking more about helping others and serving God than about performing on grand stages in famous concert halls. The feeling grew stronger as graduation approached. While her classmates talked excitedly about college and their future careers, Annie felt confused and conflicted. She loved music more than anything, but she also felt a deep calling to dedicate her life to something bigger than herself. She talked to her parents about these feelings, and while they were surprised, they supported her as they always had. They told her to follow her heart, whatever that meant for her future. Mrs. Henderson was less understanding. She felt that Annie was throwing away a rare gift, wasting years of training and natural ability. After months of prayer and careful thought, Annie made her decision. Instead of going to music school, she would enter the convent and become a nun. She believed that God was calling her to serve him in this way, and she was ready to give up everything else to answer that call. The day she entered St. Catherine's Convent was both the happiest and saddest day of her life. Happy because she felt she was following God's plan for her, sad because she knew she was leaving behind the music that had been such a huge part of who she was. As part of taking her vows, Annie gave up all her worldly possessions. That included her sheet music, her competition trophies, and even her personal piano that her parents had bought her for her 16th birthday. She became Sister Agnes, devoted entirely to prayer, service, and the simple life of the convent. For 50 years, she had kept her musical past as a private memory, something that belonged to the person she used to be before she dedicated her life to God. Spring had arrived early in 2023, and the small town of Millbrook was buzzing with excitement about something that hadn't happened in years. The old community center on Main Street was finally going to host a charity fundraiser, and everyone was talking about it. The idea had started with Janet Miller, a retired school teacher who had moved to Millbrook 5 years earlier. She had been walking past the community center one afternoon when she noticed how run down it looked. The paint was peeling, the windows needed cleaning, and the small garden in front was overgrown with weeds. But Janet could see the potential in the building. She imagined it bustling with activity, bringing the community together for events and celebrations. Janet wasn't the type of person to just complain about problems. She was a doer. Within a week, she had organized a meeting with the town council and several local business owners. Her proposal was simple: hold a charity concert to raise money for renovating the community center. The building could become a real hub for the town again, hosting everything from wedding receptions to children's birthday parties. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Local businesses volunteered to donate food and decorations. The high school drama club offered to help with setup. Even the mayor got involved, promising to match whatever funds they raised up to $5,000. But there was one problem. They needed performers for the concert, and Millbrook wasn't exactly known for its entertainment scene. The town had about 3,000 residents, mostly families and retirees who had chosen the quiet life over big city excitement. Janet put up flyers around town asking for volunteers to perform. The response was modest but encouraging. The church choir said they would sing a few songs. A teenager named Tommy Chen volunteered to play guitar. Mrs. Peterson from the bakery said she used to sing in her college's musical theater group and would be happy to perform a few Broadway songs. Word about the fundraiser spread throughout the community, including to St. Catherine's Convent, which sat on a small hill just outside of town. The convent had always been part of the community, even though the sisters kept to themselves most of the time. They bought their groceries at the local market, attended town meetings when community issues affected them, and the townspeople often saw them walking together on the tree-lined paths around their property. When Sister Agnes heard about the fundraiser during dinner one evening, something stirred inside her chest. Sister Mary had mentioned it casually while passing around a bowl of vegetable soup that they had made from their garden. "They're looking for people to perform," Sister Mary said, taking a small sip of her soup. "Apparently they need more acts to fill the evening." Janet Miller stopped by yesterday asking if any of us might be interested in participating. The other sisters chuckled gently at this suggestion. They were devoted to their quiet life of prayer and service. Performing on stage seemed as foreign to them as flying to the moon. But Sister Agnes felt her heart beating a little faster. She hadn't thought about performing in decades. But suddenly the idea wouldn't leave her mind. That night, after evening prayers, Sister Agnes found herself standing in front of the old piano in the main hall. She looked around to make sure she was alone, then slowly lifted the wooden cover that protected the keys. Even in the dim light, she could see that the piano needed attention. Some of the ivory on the keys had turned yellow and there was dust settled between the black keys. She pressed middle C very softly, trying not to make too much noise. The sound was muffled and slightly out of tune, but it was still beautiful to her ears. She pressed a few more keys, playing a simple melody that she remembered from her childhood. Her fingers felt stiff at first, but muscle memory is a powerful thing. Before she knew it, she was playing a complete song, one of the hymns they sang during Sunday service, but with variations and embellishments that made it sound completely different. For the next several days, Sister Agnes couldn't stop thinking about the fundraiser, during morning prayers while she was working in the garden, even while she was helping prepare meals in the kitchen. The idea of performing kept coming back to her. She told herself it was silly. She was 72 years old and hadn't played seriously in 50 years. What could she possibly contribute to a community concert? But the feeling wouldn't go away. Finally, she made a decision that surprised even herself. After morning prayers on a Thursday, she approached Mother Superior, the elderly nun who led their small community. "Mother Superior," Sister Agnes said quietly, "I was wondering if I might have permission to volunteer for the community fundraiser." Mother Superior looked up from the letter she was reading, her kind eyes curious behind wire-rimmed glasses. "That's a lovely thought, Sister Agnes. What did you have in mind? Perhaps we could donate some of the vegetables from our garden for the refreshments?" Sister Agnes took a deep breath. "Actually, I was thinking I might offer to play piano." The suggestion hung in the air between them. Mother Superior had known Sister Agnes for 15 years, ever since she had transferred to St. Catherine's from a larger convent in the city. In all that time, she had never heard Sister Agnes express any particular interest in music beyond their daily prayers. "I didn't know you played," Mother Superior said gently. "I used to," Sister Agnes replied, "before I took my vows. I thought perhaps I could contribute something to help the community." Mother Superior smiled. "Of course you have my permission. It would be wonderful for our convent to be part of this community effort." With permission granted, Sister Agnes walked to town the next day to speak with Janet Miller. She found Janet at the community center, measuring windows and making notes about what needed to be repaired. "Sister Agnes," Janet said with surprise and pleasure. "How nice to see you. Are you here about the fundraiser?" "Yes," Sister Agnes said, suddenly feeling nervous. "I wanted to volunteer to perform." "I play piano," Janet's face lit up. "That's wonderful. We can definitely use a piano player. What kind of music do you play? Hymns, classical pieces?" Sister Agnes hesitated. She wasn't sure how to answer that question. "Whatever would be most helpful," she said finally. Janet made a note on her clipboard. "Perfect. We're planning to have the performances range from about 5 to 15 minutes each. Would that work for you?" "Yes, that would be fine." Over the next few days, Janet worked on organizing the program for the evening. She created a list of all the performers and started thinking about the order of the acts. When she looked at Sister Agnes's name on the list, she felt a small concern. She liked the idea of having the convent represented at the fundraiser. It would bring the whole community together. But she worried about how a nun playing hymns would fit with the more contemporary acts they had planned. Janet called a meeting with her organizing committee to discuss the program. The group included her neighbor Bob Williams, who owned the hardware store, and Linda Chen, Tommy's mother who worked at the bank. "I'm thinking we should put Sister Agnes early in the program," Janet said, looking at her notes. "Maybe right after the opening remarks. She'll probably play something simple and religious, which might be nice to start with, but then we can move into more upbeat music as the evening goes on." Bob nodded in agreement. "That makes sense. Keep the energy building throughout the night." Linda seemed less certain. "Do we know what she's planning to play? I mean, I have nothing against religious music, but will it really fit with what we're trying to do here? Janet had been wondering the same thing, but she didn't want to discourage community participation. I'm sure it will be fine. Besides, the sisters have been part of this town for decades. It's only right that they're included. As word spread about the fundraiser lineup, people in town began to express their own opinions about having a nun perform. Most were supportive, seeing it as a nice way to include everyone in the community effort. But some had concerns similar to Linda's. I hope she doesn't make it too churchy, one person said at the grocery store. This is supposed to be fun for everyone, not just religious people. She's probably going to play Amazing Grace or something like that, another person commented. I mean, what else would a 70-year-old nun know how to play? These conversations never reached Sister Agnes's ears, but if they had, she might have smiled to herself. People were making assumptions about her based on what they could see. An elderly woman in a brown habit who lived a quiet life devoted to God. They couldn't imagine that she had ever been anything else, or that she might have talents and experiences that went far beyond their expectations. Meanwhile, Sister Agnes had begun preparing for the performance in her own quiet way. Late in the evening, after the other sisters had gone to their rooms, she would slip into the main hall and spend time with the old piano. She worked slowly and carefully, not wanting to disturb anyone's sleep, but gradually her fingers began to remember things they hadn't done in decades. The piano itself was becoming her biggest challenge. It hadn't been properly tuned in years, and several keys stuck when she pressed them. She cleaned the keys as best she could and tried to work around the mechanical problems. But she knew the instrument was fighting against her. 2 weeks before the fundraiser, Janet stopped by the convent again to confirm final details with Sister Agnes. We're so excited to have you performing, Janet said warmly. Just to make sure I have everything right for the program, what piece will you be playing? Sister Agnes had been thinking about this question for days. She knew what she wanted to play, but she wasn't sure how to explain it to Janet. I thought I would play something that might surprise people, she said carefully. Janet looked puzzled. Oh, what did you have in mind? I'd prefer it to be a surprise if that's all right, but I promise it will be appropriate for the occasion. Janet left the convent that day feeling slightly unsettled. She trusted Sister Agnes, but she also felt responsible for making sure the evening went smoothly. What if the nun had chosen something that was too long or too sad, or just didn't fit with the rest of the program? But it was too late to worry about it now. The fundraiser was in 2 weeks. Tickets were selling well, and everyone in town was looking forward to an evening of community entertainment. Sister Agnes was scheduled to perform third in the program, right after the church choir and before Tommy Chen's guitar set. What no one knew, not Janet, not the other performers, not even the sisters at the convent, was that Sister Agnes had made a decision that would shock everyone who thought they knew her. She wasn't planning to play a hymn or a simple religious song. She had chosen a piece of music that would reveal a side of herself that had been hidden for 50 years. And she was both terrified and excited about sharing it with her community. The night of the fundraiser had finally arrived, and the Millbrook Community Center looked better than it had in years. Volunteers had spent the entire day transforming the dusty old building into something magical. Strings of warm lights hung from the ceiling, casting a golden glow over the room. Fresh flowers donated by the local florist decorated every table, and the smell of homemade cookies and coffee filled the air. By 7 o'clock, nearly 200 people had gathered for the event. It seemed like the entire town had turned out to support the cause. Families filled the folding chairs that had been arranged in neat rows facing the small stage. Children fidgeted in their seats while parents chatted with neighbors they hadn't seen in months. Even some people from neighboring towns had heard about the fundraiser and driven over to attend. Janet Miller stood at the side of the stage, clipboard in hand, watching the crowd with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She had organized school plays and PTA meetings before, but nothing quite like this. The success of the evening would determine whether the community center could be renovated or would continue to decay. 5 minutes until we start, she announced to the performers who were gathered backstage, which was really just a small area behind a curtain that had been hung for the occasion. The church choir was huddled together, doing vocal warm-ups and adjusting their matching blue robes. Tommy Chen sat in a corner, tuning his guitar and running through his songs one more time. Mrs. Peterson from the bakery was practicing her breathing exercises, preparing for her Broadway numbers. And there was Sister Agnes, sitting quietly on a metal folding chair, her hands folded in her lap. She looked calm, but inside her heart was beating faster than it had in years. She had spent the past 2 weeks preparing for this moment, sneaking down to the old piano every night after her sisters had gone to sleep. The piano at the community center was different from the one at the convent. Janet had arranged to borrow a baby grand piano from the music department at the regional high school. It had been tuned that morning and sounded beautiful, much better than the old upright piano that Sister Agnes had been practicing on. Places. Everyone, Janet whispered as she stepped onto the stage to address the crowd. The room gradually quieted as people realized the show was about to begin. Children stopped squirming and parents shushed their conversations. All eyes turned toward the stage where Janet stood with a warm smile. "Welcome everyone to our community fundraiser," she began, her voice carrying easily through the room without a microphone. "Thank you all for coming out tonight to support the renovation of our beloved community center. Every dollar raised tonight will go directly toward making this building a place where our community can gather for years to come." The crowd applauded enthusiastically. Janet went on to explain how the money would be used and to thank all the volunteers who had made the evening possible. Then she introduced the first act. "We're going to start tonight with our own St. Mark's Church choir, directed by Sister Mary from St. Catherine's Convent." The choir filed onto the stage, their blue robes rustling softly. Sister Mary, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and silver hair peeking out from under her habit, raised her hands to conduct. The choir began with a beautiful rendition of "How Great Thou Art," their voices blending together in perfect harmony. The audience was clearly moved by the performance. Even people who rarely attended church found themselves humming along with the familiar melody. When the choir finished, the applause was warm and genuine. "Thank you so much," Janet said as the choir exited the stage. "That was absolutely beautiful." Now continuing with our spiritual theme, we have another sister from St. Catherine's Convent. Please welcome Sister Agnes to the piano. There was polite applause as Sister Agnes walked slowly onto the stage. She looked even smaller under the stage lights, her brown habit making her almost disappear against the dark curtain behind her. Some people in the audience smiled indulgently, expecting another hymn to follow the choir's performance. Sister Agnes approached the piano bench and adjusted it slightly. She looked out at the audience for a moment, and several people noticed that her eyes seemed unusually bright. There was something in her expression that didn't quite match what people expected to see in a 72-year-old nun about to play a simple religious song. "Good evening," she said, her voice clear despite her age. "I'd like to share something with you tonight that I haven't shared with anyone in 50 years. A murmur of curiosity rippled through the crowd. This wasn't how most piano performances began, especially not ones by elderly nuns. Janet, standing at the side of the stage, felt a flutter of nervousness. What exactly had Sister Agnes planned? Sister Agnes sat down at the piano bench and placed her hands on the keys. For a moment, she closed her eyes as if she were saying a prayer. The audience waited in complete silence, sensing that something important was about to happen. Then she began to play. The first notes were soft and gentle, and for a moment people thought they were going to hear exactly what they expected, a simple, sweet hymn. But then something changed. The melody became more complex, the harmonies richer and more sophisticated. Sister Agnes's fingers moved across the keys with a confidence and skill that surprised everyone watching. Within 30 seconds, it became clear that this was not a hymn. This was classical music, and it was being played by someone who truly knew what they were doing. The piece was Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, one of the most beloved and technically demanding pieces in the classical piano repertoire. The transformation in the room was immediate and dramatic. People who had been checking their phones put them away. Children who had been fidgeting became perfectly still. Adults who had been only half listening suddenly gave their complete attention to the small figure at the piano. But Sister Agnes was just getting started. As she played, something magical happened to her. The years seemed to fall away, and the shy, quiet nun disappeared. In her place was the passionate young pianist she had been 50 years ago. Her whole body moved with the music, swaying slightly as she navigated the most challenging passages. Her fingers danced across the keys with a grace and precision that left the audience breathless. The piece built to its climactic moments, and Sister Agnes played with an emotional intensity that surprised even herself. This wasn't just technical skill, this was artistry of the highest level. She was telling a story through the music, sharing feelings and experiences that she had kept locked away for decades. People in the audience began to look at each other with expressions of amazement. Who was this woman? How had she learned to play like this? Why had no one ever known about her incredible talent? Mrs. Chen, Tommy's mother who worked at the bank, leaned over to whisper to her husband. I've heard this piece played by professional concert pianists, and she's as good as any of them. Bob Williams from the hardware store was shaking his head in disbelief. I've lived in this town for 30 years, he whispered to his wife. How did we not know she could do this? As the nocturne reached its gentle, beautiful conclusion, the room remained in complete silence for several seconds. Sister Agnes lifted her hands from the keys and sat perfectly still, as if she too was processing what had just happened. Then the applause began. It started slowly, with one person clapping, then another. Then suddenly the entire room erupted in the kind of ovation usually reserved for world-famous performers. People jumped to their feet, their applause thunderous and sustained. Some wiped tears from their eyes, moved by the unexpected beauty they had just witnessed. Sister Agnes stood up from the piano bench and turned toward the audience. Her cheeks were flushed, and there was a light in her eyes that hadn't been there when she walked onto the stage. She bowed slightly, the way she had been taught to do as a young performer, then began to walk toward the exit. But the audience wasn't ready to let her go. The applause continued and people began calling out, "More!" "Hurry!" someone shouted, "Bravo!" Others whistled and cheered. The response was so overwhelming that Sister Agnes stopped walking and turned back toward the piano. She looked uncertain for a moment, glancing toward Janet at the side of the stage. Janet nodded enthusiastically, gesturing for her to continue. The program could wait. This was clearly a special moment that shouldn't be cut short. Sister Agnes returned to the piano bench. This time she didn't close her eyes or pause for prayer. She simply began playing again, and this time she chose something even more ambitious. The opening notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 filled the room, or at least the solo piano version of it. If the Chopin had surprised the audience, the Rachmaninoff left them completely stunned. This was one of the most technically demanding pieces ever written for piano, requiring not just skill but incredible strength and endurance. The fact that a 72-year-old woman was performing it flawlessly seemed almost impossible. But there she was, her aged hands moving with the speed and precision of someone a quarter her age. The music filled every corner of the room, complex and beautiful and powerful. Sister Agnes played with her eyes closed now, completely lost in the music, her body moving with the rhythm as if she were conducting an invisible orchestra. The second piece was longer than the first, and by the time it ended, the audience was completely transported. Many people later said it was one of the most moving musical experiences of their lives. When Sister Agnes finally lifted her hands from the keys for the second time, the silence that followed was filled with awe. This time, when the applause came, it was even more intense than before. People stood and cheered as if they were at Carnegie Hall instead of a small-town community center. Some people were crying openly, overwhelmed by the beauty and the surprise of what they had witnessed. Sister Agnes stood once again, but this time she looked different. The transformation was complete. She was no longer just the quiet, humble nun that people thought they knew. She was revealed as an artist, a musician of extraordinary talent who had been hiding her gift for 50 years. As she walked off the stage this time, people reached out to touch her hand or pat her shoulder. Everyone wanted to congratulate her, to tell her how moved they were, to ask her questions about where she had learned to play like that. Janet Miller stood backstage, her clipboard forgotten, tears streaming down her face. She realized that the evening had become something much more significant than a simple fundraiser. It had become a revelation, a moment when an entire community discovered that they had been living alongside a hidden treasure for years without knowing it. The rest of the evening's performers would do their best, and the crowd would be polite and supportive. But everyone knew that nothing else that happened that night could possibly compare to what they had just witnessed. Sister Agnes had given them a gift that none of them would ever forget. The hours following Sister Agnes's performance felt like a dream that no one wanted to wake up from. After the fundraiser officially ended at 10 o'clock, people lingered in the community center, reluctant to leave. They stood in small groups talking excitedly about what they had just witnessed, sharing their amazement with anyone who would listen. "I've been going to concerts my whole life," said Robert Martinez, a retired music teacher who had driven over from the next town. "I've heard pianists who studied at Juilliard and performed with major orchestras. That woman has a gift that you can't teach in any music school." Meanwhile, Sister Agnes had quietly slipped away during the final applause, walking the familiar path back to St. Catherine's Convent in the darkness. Her heart was still racing and her hands were trembling slightly, not from nervousness now, but from the overwhelming emotion of what had just happened. For 50 years, she had kept that part of herself locked away, and tonight she had set it free. When she arrived back at the convent, the other sisters were waiting for her in the main hall. Word had already reached them about what had happened at the fundraiser. Sister Mary, who had been there with the choir, had called ahead to tell them that something extraordinary had taken place. "Sister Agnes," said Mother Superior, her voice filled with gentle curiosity, "Sister Mary tells us you gave quite a performance tonight." Sister Agnes sat down slowly in one of the simple wooden chairs that surrounded their dining table. She looked at the faces of her sisters, women who had shared her daily life for years but who had never known this part of her story. "I hope I didn't do anything wrong," she said quietly. "I felt called to share what God had given me even though I had put it aside for so long." "Wrong?" Mother Superior laughed softly. "My dear sister, from what we've heard, you brought great joy to many people tonight. That could never be wrong. But the real impact of Sister Agnes's performance was just beginning to unfold. Unknown to her, several people in the audience had been recording with their phones. In today's world, moments like this don't stay local for very long. By the next morning, a video of Sister Agnes playing the Rachmaninoff piece had been posted online. The person who posted it wrote a simple caption: "Elderly nun shocks entire town with incredible piano performance. This will give you chills." The video started slowly with just a few dozen views and shares, but there was something about it that captured people's imagination. Maybe it was the contrast between the humble nun in her brown habit and the sophisticated music she was playing. Maybe it was the pure joy and passion visible on her face as she played. Or maybe it was simply the reminder that extraordinary gifts can be hidden in the most unexpected places. Within 3 days, the video had been viewed over 100,000 times. By the end of the week, it had reached 1 million views. Comments poured in from all over the world, in dozens of different languages, all expressing amazement and admiration for Sister Agnes. "This made me cry tears of joy," wrote one viewer. "What a beautiful reminder that we all have hidden talents waiting to be shared." "I'm a professional pianist and I can tell you that this is world-class playing," commented another. This woman could have had a career on any concert stage in the world. The story was picked up by local news stations, then regional ones, and finally by national media outlets. Reporters began calling the convent, asking for interviews with Sister Agnes. Talk show producers wanted to book her as a guest. Concert halls reached out, offering her opportunities to perform. Sister Agnes found all of this attention overwhelming and confusing. She had simply wanted to help her community raise money for their building renovation. She had never intended to become famous or to have her personal story shared with millions of strangers. "I don't understand why everyone is so surprised," she told Mother Superior one morning as they sat in the convent's small garden. "Music is one of God's greatest gifts. I was blessed to receive some ability in this area, and I shared it." "Isn't that what we're supposed to do with our gifts?" But the world outside the convent saw it differently. In an age where people often felt disconnected and cynical, Sister Agnes's story provided something that many had been searching for without realizing it: proof that beauty and excellence could exist in quiet, humble places. Her performance reminded people that they might be surrounded by hidden treasures, by individuals whose true gifts had never been fully revealed. The reaction wasn't entirely positive, however. Some people questioned why Sister Agnes had hidden her talent for so long. Comments online debated whether she had wasted her gift by joining the convent instead of pursuing a musical career. Think of all the joy she could have brought to the world if she had chosen to be a concert pianist instead, wrote one critic. What a shame that such talent was locked away for 50 years. These comments hurt Sister Agnes when she first read them, but Mother Superior helped her see them from a different perspective. "You brought joy to your community here for 5 decades," Mother Superior reminded her. You served God and helped countless people who came to us for guidance and support. Just because your musical gift wasn't visible doesn't mean you weren't using your other gifts every single day. As the weeks passed, the attention showed no signs of dying down. Interview requests continued to pour in. A major record label contacted the convent, asking if Sister Agnes would be interested in making an album. A documentary filmmaker wanted to tell her story. A famous conductor invited her to perform as a soloist with his orchestra. Sister Agnes felt pulled in different directions. Part of her was excited by these opportunities. The young pianist in her was thrilled by the possibility of sharing her music with even more people. But the nun she had become for 50 years was comfortable with her quiet life of service and prayer. "What should I do?" she asked during one of her regular conversations with Mother Superior. "What does your heart tell you?" Mother Superior replied, as she often did when the sisters came to her with difficult decisions. Sister Agnes thought about this question for several days. She prayed about it during morning and evening services. She walked the familiar paths around the convent grounds, considering what God might want her to do with this unexpected attention. Finally, she made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She would accept some of the opportunities, but on her own terms. She would give interviews to share her story, but only to encourage others who might be hiding their own gifts. She would perform in concerts, but only for charitable causes. She would make recordings, but any profits would go to support the convent and other charitable organizations. "I want to use this attention to remind people that everyone has something special to offer," she explained to a reporter during her first television interview. "My gift happened to be music, but someone else might be an amazing cook or a gifted teacher, or have the ability to make people laugh when they're sad. We all have something beautiful inside us." The interview was watched by millions of people, and Sister Agnes's message resonated deeply. Letters began arriving at the convent from people all over the world, sharing their own stories of hidden talents and delayed dreams. An 80-year-old man wrote that Sister Agnes had inspired him to return to painting, something he had given up 60 years earlier when his father told him he needed to focus on practical things. A middle-aged woman shared that she had started writing poetry again after seeing the joy on Sister Agnes's face when she played piano. A teenager wrote that watching Sister Agnes had given her the courage to audition for her school's musical, despite being shy and afraid of performing in front of others. These letters became Sister Agnes's greatest treasure, more valuable to her than any of the fame or opportunities that had come her way. Each one was proof that her decision to share her gift had created ripples of inspiration that were spreading far beyond anything she could have imagined. The fundraiser that had started it all was also a tremendous success. The original goal had been to raise $5,000 for the community center renovation. Thanks to all the attention surrounding Sister Agnes's performance, donations had poured in from around the world. The final total was over $200,000, enough not only to renovate the building, but to establish a permanent fund for community programs. Janet Miller, the woman who had organized the original fundraiser, often marveled at how the evening had exceeded her wildest expectations. She had hoped to bring the community together and raise a modest amount of money. Instead, she had accidentally discovered a hidden treasure that had touched hearts around the globe. "Sometimes I think that night changed all of us," she told a friend. "We learned that we never really know the people around us as well as we think we do." Sister Agnes had been part of our community for 15 years, but we only saw the surface. It makes me wonder what other amazing stories are walking among us every day, just waiting for the right moment to be revealed. 1 year after that magical evening at the Millbrook Community Center, Sister Agnes sat at a beautiful new piano in the renovated main hall of St. Catherine's Convent. Sunlight streamed through the freshly cleaned windows, casting warm patterns across the polished wooden floors. The sound of children's laughter echoed from the garden outside, where her newest students were taking a break from their piano lessons. The transformation had been remarkable, not just for Sister Agnes personally, but for the entire community that had grown around her story. What had started as a simple fundraiser had blossomed into something much more meaningful and lasting. The convent itself had changed dramatically. With donations that continued to pour in from around the world, the sisters had been able to make repairs and improvements that they had only dreamed of before. The old kitchen had been modernized, the chapel had been restored to its original beauty, and most importantly, they had built a small, music room where Sister Agnes could teach and practice without disturbing the other sisters during their quiet hours. But the most significant change was the music. For the soul program that Sister Agnes had created, every Saturday morning, children from the community came to the convent for free piano lessons. The program had started with just 5 students, but word had spread quickly. Now there was a waiting list of young people eager to learn from the famous nun who had shocked the world with her hidden talent. Remember, music isn't just about playing the right notes, Sister Agnes told her current group of students. A mix of children ranging from age 6 to 16. It's about sharing something beautiful with others, about expressing feelings that are too deep for words. 8-year-old Lucy Chen, Tommy's younger sister, raised her hand. Sister Agnes, were you scared when you played at the big concert? Sister Agnes smiled at the memory. I was terrified, she admitted. But sometimes the things that scare us the most are the things we most need to do. Fear often means we're about to step into something important. The children nodded solemnly, as if this was wisdom they needed to remember. These Saturday lessons had become more than just music. Instruction. They were life lessons wrapped in melodies and harmonies. The success of the children's program had inspired Sister Agnes to expand her mission. Once a month, she held community concert nights at the renovated community center. Local musicians of all skill levels were invited to perform, and the events had become beloved traditions that brought people together from towns throughout the region. Everyone has music inside them, Sister Agnes would say at the beginning of each concert night. Tonight is about celebrating that music, whether you're performing your first song or your 1,000th. These concerts featured everyone from nervous 7-year-olds playing Twinkle, Twinkle Little Star, to accomplished adult musicians sharing complex classical pieces. Sister Agnes performed at each event as well, but she was always careful to make sure the spotlight didn't stay on her alone. She had learned that her role was not to be the star, but to be the encourager who helped others discover their own light. The ripple effects of that original performance continued to spread in unexpected ways. The convent had received letters from people all over the world who had been inspired by Sister Agnes's story to pursue their own long-dormant dreams. A 65-year-old grandmother from Australia had sent a photo of herself at an art easel, painting her first landscape in 40 years. A businessman from Japan had written to say that Sister Agnes had inspired him to return to playing violin, something he had abandoned when he started his career. A woman from Brazil had shared that she had finally enrolled in cooking school at age 50, pursuing the dream she had put aside to raise her family. Your story reminded me that it's never too late to honor the gifts we've been given, wrote a 70-year-old man from Canada. I've started composing music again for the first time since high school. My family thinks I've lost my mind, but I've never been happier. Sister Agnes kept every letter in a special box, reading them whenever she needed encouragement. They reminded her that her decision to step onto that stage had created a chain reaction of courage and creativity that continued to grow every day. The media attention had eventually calmed down, but Sister Agnes had been strategic about the opportunities she accepted. She had recorded an album called Songs of Grace, with all proceeds going to support music education programs in underserved communities. The album had become surprisingly popular, reaching the top of several classical music charts and introducing thousands of people to pieces they had never heard before. She had also given a series of talks at schools and community centers, always with the same message: your gifts are not accidents. They are treasures meant to be shared with the world, even if the world is just the people in your own family or neighborhood. One of her most meaningful appearances had been at a retirement home in the city, where she played for residents who rarely had visitors. After her performance, an elderly man had approached her with tears in his eyes. I haven't heard Chopin played like that since my wife died 10 years ago, he had said. She was a pianist too. Thank you for bringing her music back to me for a moment. These personal connections had become the heart of Sister Agnes's new mission. She had realized that her gift was not just about playing beautiful music, but about using that music to create moments of joy, comfort, and inspiration for others.